The small music hall was buzzing with quiet excitement. Outside, the streets were noisy with cars and people, but inside, it felt like a different world. Young musicians from nearby towns had gathered for a rare workshop. Everyone knew that a famous American trumpet legend would be there. Some had studied his performances online for years. Some had read stories about him. But very few had actually seen him in person. And now, he was going to be in the same room as them. The hall was filled with chairs arranged in neat rows, and at the front, a small stage with a few instruments. A piano sat in the corner, slightly worn but still elegant. Music stands were scattered around and there were a few microphones set up, although it was clear the day was mostly about live playing, not recording. The young musicians fidgeted in their seats, adjusting their music sheets, tapping their shoes or nervously looking around. Every now and then, someone would glance at the door, hoping it would open any moment. Finally, a soft murmur ran through the crowd. The door opened and he stepped in. He wasn't a giant man, but he carried a presence that filled the room immediately. His hair was a little gray, and there were faint wrinkles around his eyes, signs of age and experience. But his eyes were sharp, alert, and piercing, scanning the room like a teacher who had seen hundreds of students before. He carried a trumpet case in one hand and in the other a small bag with sheet music. The murmurs turned into whispers and whispers into silence. Everyone knew this moment was special. The legend walked slowly to the center of the stage, set his trumpet down, and looked at the audience. He smiled lightly, but it was a small smile, more of acknowledgement than friendliness. Then he spoke, and the sound of his voice, calm and controlled, made people lean forward in their chairs. "I've come here today to see talent," he said. "Not talent that looks good on paper, or talent that sounds okay when no one is listening. I want to hear someone who surprises me." The room felt tense. Some students straightened their backs, hoping he would notice them. Others shifted nervously, unsure if they were ready. Among them, a young woman sat quietly near the back. She wasn't dressed in flashy clothes, didn't carry an expensive instrument, and she hadn't prepared a performance. In fact, she hadn't planned to play at all. She had come to learn, to watch, and maybe take some notes for herself. But now, it seemed as if the spotlight had already chosen her. The legend scanned the room, his eyes moving quickly from one student to another. His gaze lingered briefly on some of the older, more confident-looking students. Then he shook his head slightly, as if disappointed. "Nobody looks ready," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. Then, almost suddenly, his gaze stopped. It landed on the young woman at the back. She froze for a moment, feeling the weight of his stare. He walked closer to the front row, and when he spoke again, his tone was challenging. "Why don't you come up here and play something?" he asked, pointing directly at her. The words were simple, but the room went silent. The other students exchanged nervous glances. She felt her heart jump into her throat. She hadn't expected to be chosen. She didn't even have her own trumpet. She opened her mouth to speak, to say that she couldn't, but he didn't wait for an answer. "It's okay if you've never played in front of anyone. Just try," he said. There was no harshness, but there was no encouragement either. Just a quiet challenge. Her hands shook slightly as she stood up. Every step toward the stage felt heavy, as if each one carried the weight of everyone's expectations. People in the room whispered quietly, some skeptical, some curious. She reached the front, and the legend looked at her instrument, or rather, the fact that she didn't have one. She hesitated, wishing she could explain that she wasn't prepared, that she was just a visitor, that this wasn't her plan. But something inside her told her to stay calm. One of the staff members noticed her hesitation and quickly offered an old trumpet from a storage case. It was dusty, with scratches and dents along its body. The valves looked sticky, and the finish had dulled over time. The young woman hesitated for a moment, unsure if she could play something on it. But the legend simply raised his eyebrow, a silent challenge. "Try," he said. That was all. No instructions, no guidance. Just try. She lifted the old trumpet, feeling its weight in her hands. It didn't feel right at first, too heavy, too cold. She adjusted her lips to the mouthpiece, took a deep breath, and remembered the lessons her grandfather had once taught her years ago. Her fingers felt for the valves and she pressed them carefully, almost instinctively. The hall was completely silent now. Every eye in the room was on her. Every student and teacher waited, some with skepticism, some with curiosity, to see what would happen. She blew the first note. It wasn't perfect. The old trumpet made it sound rougher than she expected. But it was strong, clear. The room vibrated slightly, not just from the sound, but from the confidence it carried. She adjusted her lips and played another note. This time, the tone was richer, smoother, and more controlled. She moved into a simple melody she remembered from her childhood. It wasn't complicated, but it flowed naturally, full of emotion. The legend's eyes widened slightly. He took a small step closer, his usual calm and critical expression slowly giving way to surprise. The young woman continued, unaware of how amazed the audience was. Every note she played carried a story, a memory, a feeling that seemed far older than her years. The other students leaned forward in their seats, realizing that what they had assumed about her was completely wrong. They had underestimated her. She finished her short melody with a gentle, lingering note. The silence that followed was heavy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then, almost instinctively, the legend clapped once, softly but with meaning. It wasn't a polite clap, it was the clap of someone who had just seen something unexpected, something genuine. He looked at her, still holding the trumpet, still catching her breath, and said, "You didn't tell me you could play like that." Her heart raced. She shook her head, feeling both nervous and proud. I didn't think I would get the chance," she said softly. The legend nodded, still studying her, as if trying to figure out how someone so young and unassuming could produce such talent. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes carried respect. "Talent like yours doesn't show up often," he said. "It doesn't matter where you learned it. It matters that you have it. That's what counts." She lowered the trumpet slowly, feeling a mix of relief and excitement. The students around her whispered in disbelief. Some clapped quietly. Some were silent, still trying to process what had just happened. The legend looked at the room and then back at her. "I've heard a lot of good players in my life," he said. "But sometimes the best ones come from places you least expect. Today you reminded me of that." For the first time, she felt a surge of confidence. The fear that had weighed on her just minutes ago began to fade. She realized that this workshop, which she had come to watch quietly, had suddenly become the beginning of something important, something that could change the path of her life. All because she had taken one deep breath, picked up an old trumpet, and played. The hall remained quiet for a few moments longer. The young woman felt every eye on her, not with judgment, but with curiosity and newfound respect. She looked at the legend, unsure what would come next, but feeling ready for it. And in that moment, the day felt larger than the small music hall. The streets outside, the noise, the cars, the people, it all seemed distant. Inside, there was only the music, the sound of possibility, and the beginning of a story that was just starting to unfold. The young woman stepped back from the stage, her hands still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. She had just played in front of one of the greatest trumpet players in the world, and, to her surprise, she hadn't failed. The applause had been soft but meaningful, and the legend's look of surprise had lingered in her mind. She hadn't expected that moment to feel so heavy, so important. As she walked back to her seat, she noticed the other students watching her with curiosity. Some faces were wide-eyed, showing disbelief. Others had faint smiles, perhaps impressed, perhaps a little envious. She tried to calm herself, sitting down quietly, but her heart continued to race. Every beat seemed louder than the last, and she could feel her palms still warm and sweaty. She was relieved she had played, but a small part of her also worried. What if she had made a mistake? What if the legend had only been polite? The legend didn't move immediately. He remained on the stage, looking at her as if he were trying to understand something about her playing. Slowly, he lifted his trumpet and played a short, sharp note. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't part of a song. It was more like a question, a challenge. The note echoed through the hall, clear and confident. Then he lowered his trumpet and said, "You played well, but let me ask, how did you learn to play like that?" The young woman hesitated. She had learned music at home, mostly by listening to her grandfather play and trying to imitate him. She hadn't gone to any special schools. Her techniques were not polished in the formal sense. She had never performed on stage except at small family gatherings. I learned from my grandfather, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. He taught me when I was very young. Mostly I just watched him and practiced on my own. The legend's eyes narrowed slightly and he tilted his head. He seemed intrigued but also skeptical. Your grandfather? That's, unusual. Most people I meet at these workshops come from formal training, from music schools, from lessons that cost thousands of dollars. You didn't, and yet you can play like that? His tone wasn't harsh, but there was a hint of disbelief. She nodded, her hands resting on her lap. She felt the weight of the room's attention again. Everyone was listening closely, including the students who had whispered doubts just minutes ago. Some of them had assumed she couldn't play at all. Now they were thinking differently, trying to understand how someone so quiet and unassuming could produce music that moved even a seasoned professional. The legend lowered his trumpet and stepped closer. His steps were careful, deliberate, like a teacher approaching a student he wasn't sure about yet. Most people underestimate someone who doesn't have the right background, he said. They assume that talent comes only with opportunity, only with expensive lessons. But sometimes talent is hidden. It grows in quiet places, unnoticed until the right moment comes. He paused, studying her face. And today that moment came for you. The young woman felt a mix of pride and nervousness. Pride that she had played well, nervous because the legend's words felt like a challenge. She wasn't sure what would come next. Would he ask her to play more? Would he critique her, pointing out mistakes she didn't know she had made? The thought made her stomach twist. Then one of the staff members whispered to her, "Do you want to try a more difficult piece? He seems curious to see more of what you can do." She hesitated. She had only ever played simple melodies from memory. Challenging pieces, especially ones the legend might choose, were far beyond anything she had tried. But at the same time, a small voice inside her urged her to say yes. This could be a chance she might never get again. I can try, she said quietly, unsure if her voice would even carry. The legend nodded slowly. Good, don't worry about perfection. Just play. Show me what you feel, not what you think you should play. His words were simple but powerful. They didn't demand technical mastery. They demanded honesty, expression, courage. A few students whispered among themselves. Some were skeptical, thinking she would fail. Others were curious, eager to see how she would respond. The room felt charged, like something important was about to happen. The young woman took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the old trumpet in her hands. Its scratches and dents reminded her that music could come from anywhere. From imperfect things, from overlooked instruments, from quiet people. She lifted the trumpet, placed her lips on the mouthpiece, and played the first note. It was strong, clear, and steady. She had learned to control her breath and her fingers, to move instinctively with the melody that lived in her mind. The legend's eyes widened slightly. He leaned closer, listening with careful attention, as if he were trying to decode the story hidden in her music. The melody she chose was not complicated, but it was full of emotion. Each note had a meaning, a memory, a feeling she had carried for years. She remembered her grandfather sitting on the old wooden chair, playing the trumpet while she watched. She remembered the evenings when music had been the only comfort in a quiet house. She poured all of that into her playing, and the sound filled the hall. The legend was quiet now. He didn't clap, didn't interrupt, didn't give instructions. He simply listened. And as she continued, the other students began to realize that this was not just practice or luck. This was talent, raw and honest, shaped by experience, not by technique alone. Some whispered to each other, "How is she doing this? She's amazing. I didn't think she could play like this." The room was alive with quiet awe. She finished the short piece with a lingering note that seemed to hang in the air. The silence afterward was heavy, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then slowly the legend clapped. Not a polite, formal clap, but a clap full of meaning, full of recognition. He looked directly at her. "I see now," he said. "You have talent. Real talent. And it's not the kind that shows up in competitions or formal lessons. It's the kind that comes from the heart. That's rare." Her chest swelled slightly. She wasn't used to praise from anyone, let alone someone she had admired for so long. She felt a warmth spread through her, a mix of relief, pride, and excitement. She had always loved music, but now she felt like someone else saw it too, someone who understood it in a way that mattered. The legend continued, his tone more relaxed now. "Most young musicians are nervous when I ask them to play. They try too hard to impress, to sound perfect. But you just played? That's why it was good. That's why it was real. That's why it surprised me." He looked around the room at the other students, some of whom were still whispering among themselves. "Pay attention. Talent is not always obvious. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's humble. And sometimes it surprises everyone." The young woman sat back down, her hands still holding the trumpet loosely. She felt a sense of connection to the legend even though they had just met. She realized that music was not only about playing notes correctly. It was about expressing something real, something human. She had shown that today, even if only for a few minutes. In a small music hall far from the stages she had dreamed about, the legend glanced at her one more time, a small nod of approval. Then he turned to the rest of the students. "Now, anyone else who wants to play, feel free. But remember, it's not about showing off. It's about sharing. It's about honesty." The young woman listened, still catching her breath, feeling both inspired and humbled. She had stepped into the unknown and discovered something important, not just about her music, but about herself. As the workshop continued, she noticed other students picking up their instruments, trying pieces they had practiced for weeks. Some were confident, some hesitant. She smiled quietly to herself, thinking about how her own journey had been different. No lessons, no big stages, no formal training. Just quiet practice, persistence, and love for music. And yet, here she was, standing out in a way she hadn't expected when the break came. Some students approached her, asking questions, complimenting her playing, and sharing their own experiences. She answered softly, grateful but shy. The legend walked off the stage for a short moment, returning with a sheet of music in his hand. He handed it to her with a small smile. "Try this when you can," he said. "It's not easy, but I think you'll like the challenge." She took it carefully, feeling the weight of opportunity in her hands. The rest of the afternoon continued with lessons, short performances, and demonstrations. But she couldn't stop thinking about that moment on stage. About the surprise in the legend's eyes. About the power of music to connect people, to reveal hidden talent, to change how others see you. She realized that her life had shifted in a small but important way. She had faced fear, embraced a challenge, and shown her true self through music. By the end of the day, she felt exhausted but fulfilled. Her fingers ached slightly from holding the trumpet, but it was a pleasant kind of tiredness, the kind that comes from doing something meaningful. As the students packed their instruments and prepared to leave, she looked at the legend one last time. He nodded again, a gesture that carried more meaning than words could. She knew this was just the beginning, but it was a beginning filled with possibility, and so, as she walked out of the hall, holding the old trumpet and the new sheet music, she felt a sense of hope and determination. She had discovered that talent could be quiet, unassuming, and hidden, but when it emerged, it could leave even the greatest experts stunned. After the initial excitement of the first performance had settled, the young woman returned to her seat, still clutching the old trumpet. The workshop continued, but she felt a mixture of emotions swirling inside her: excitement, nervousness, and a strange sense of anticipation. The legend had seen her talent, yes, but now he seemed curious, almost challenging, to see what else she could do. That thought both thrilled and terrified her. As she watched the other students perform, she noticed how different their approach was compared to hers. Some played flawlessly, hitting every note with precision, yet their music felt mechanical, lacking warmth or soul. Others struggled, missing notes and looking frustrated, but they carried a certain energy, a visible passion for their instruments. She realized that music was more than just notes on a page. It was about expression, feeling, and telling a story through sound. And she wanted to tell hers. The legend, observing from the stage, finally spoke again. "I want to hear something different. Something that shows me how you interpret music, not just play it. Who feels ready?" His voice was calm, but it carried authority. Some students hesitated, unsure if they were prepared. Some looked at their sheet music, trying to pick something familiar. The young woman sat quietly, hoping he wouldn't notice her again. She hadn't prepared anything after all. She had played what came naturally to her, but before she could relax, the legend's gaze landed on her. He didn't smile. He didn't give her a choice. He simply said, "Come up here. I want you to try something harder." The words were simple, but the weight of them made her heart pound. Harder? She barely knew what she was doing. She had only played simple melodies she had learned by memory. She had never faced a true challenge like this. She rose slowly, feeling her knees tremble slightly. The old trumpet felt heavier in her hands now, as if the moment demanded more than she had ever given before. The legend handed her a new sheet of music. The pages were filled with notes she had never seen before. Complex rhythms, high notes, fast passages, all designed for experienced players. She looked at it and felt her stomach tighten. She wanted to refuse, to step back, but she remembered the first moment she had played for him. She remembered how that note, that melody had surprised even him. And now she realized this was another chance to surprise him. Taking a deep breath, she lifted the trumpet and placed her lips on the mouthpiece. The first note came out shakily. Not perfect, not polished, but it was there. She quickly adjusted, letting her fingers move instinctively over the valves. Her grandfather's lessons came back to her, not the exact notes, but the feeling, the technique, the way to let the music flow naturally. She began to play the melody as best as she could, letting her intuition guide her. The legend stepped closer, leaning slightly forward, his eyes fixed on her hands and her posture. He wasn't just watching. He was studying her. Every movement she made, every note she played, he seemed to absorb. He could tell she wasn't formally trained for this kind of music, but he could also see the raw talent beneath her hands. He didn't intervene, didn't offer advice, but the intensity of his gaze made her feel both nervous and motivated. The first few measures were challenging. Her fingers stumbled over the valves, her breath wavered on some high notes, and there were moments when she thought she might fail. But she didn't stop. She adjusted her rhythm, corrected her mistakes, and kept going. Every note carried emotion, even if it wasn't perfect. She realized that music wasn't just about perfection. It was about communication. She wanted to tell a story with every sound, and she poured everything she felt into that trumpet. The room grew quieter as she continued. Other students watched in silence, captivated by the transformation. Some had underestimated her before, thinking she was just another quiet observer. Now they could see that she had courage, talent, and a presence that made her music resonate beyond technique. Even the staff members leaned forward, impressed by her determination. The legend's expression changed subtly. At first, it had been curiosity and mild surprise. Now there was admiration. He knew he had underestimated her, and that realization brought a spark of excitement to his eyes. This young woman, who had arrived quietly and humbly, was now challenging his own expectations. She was not just playing notes. She was expressing something profound. He had seen many talented musicians, but few could evoke such honesty and feeling under pressure. As the piece progressed, she began to feel more confident. Her fingers moved more smoothly, her breath flowed more evenly, and the notes started to blend into a melody that sounded beautiful despite the complexity. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel the music fully, letting it guide her. In that instant, she forgot about the audience, the legend, and even her own fears. There was only the trumpet, the music, and the story she was telling. The legend stepped back slightly, allowing her space to perform fully. He listened intently, noting the subtleties of her technique, the way she controlled her breath, the slight nuances in tone, the emotion behind every note. He could see that she had learned to rely on intuition and feeling, not just practice. That kind of musical maturity was rare, especially in someone so young. As she neared the end of the piece, the notes became faster, more intricate, and more demanding. Her heart raced, but she kept playing, refusing to let the music falter. Every mistake she made was corrected immediately. Every challenging passage was faced with courage. The hall seemed to hold its breath, sensing the tension and the effort she was putting into every sound. Finally, she reached the last note. It hung in the air for a moment, strong and clear, before fading into silence. The room remained quiet, as if everyone was processing what they had just heard. Then slowly the legend clapped. It was a deliberate, measured clap, full of respect and acknowledgement. Not a polite or casual clap, this was recognition. This was admiration from someone who had heard thousands of musicians, but had just witnessed something rare, who looked at her directly and spoke. That was impressive. More than impressive. You didn't just play the notes, you interpreted them. You took a difficult piece and made it your own? Most people would struggle, but you made it speak. His voice was calm but carried weight. She felt a shiver run down her spine. This was not empty praise. This was the acknowledgement of someone who truly understood music. The young woman lowered the trumpet slowly, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her heart was pounding, her fingers ached, and her chest felt tight from emotion. But the feeling was intoxicating, a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. She had faced a challenge she had thought impossible, and she had succeeded not perfectly, but in a way that mattered. The legend continued to speak, addressing the entire room. Talent is not only about technical skill. It's about courage, expression, and honesty. This young woman has all three. She has reminded us that music is not just notes, it's feeling, and it's connection. The other students listened quietly, some nodding in agreement, some whispering among themselves. Clearly inspired by what they had witnessed, she sat down, still holding the trumpet, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. The workshop continued with other students performing, but she felt different now. She had proven to herself and to the legend that she could face a challenge and rise to it. She realized that music was not just a hobby or a pastime, it was a way to express herself, to communicate something deeper than words. During the break, a few students approached her, offering congratulations and asking how she had learned to play with such emotion. She answered humbly, explaining that she had learned from her grandfather and practiced quietly at home. They listened intently, clearly impressed, and some admitted they had underestimated her before. She smiled quietly, grateful for their recognition but still processing her own feelings. The legend, meanwhile, remained on the stage, observing the students with a keen eye. At one point, he looked directly at her and gave a small nod. It was subtle, but it carried meaning. It said more than words could. It said, "You have something special. Keep going. Keep playing." She felt a surge of motivation and determination. This was not the end of her journey, it was only the beginning. As the day went on, she realized that this experience had changed something inside her. She felt more confident, more connected to her music, and more willing to take risks. She understood now that talent alone was not enough. Courage and honesty were just as important, and she knew that she had both. By the time the workshop ended for the day, the young woman felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her hands were sore from playing, her lips tired, but her heart was full. She had faced a challenge, surprised a legend, and discovered more about herself than she had ever known. The day had been exhausting, thrilling, and transformative all at once. As she packed her things and prepared to leave, she looked at the legend one last time. He gave her a small smile, one that conveyed respect, admiration, and perhaps a hint of pride. She returned the smile, feeling a sense of connection that words could not capture. She knew that this day would remain with her forever, a reminder of courage, talent, and the power of music to transform and inspire. And as she stepped out of the hall into the fading light of the afternoon, she held the old trumpet tightly, feeling not just an instrument, but a companion, a key. After her impressive performance earlier, the young woman returned to her seat, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her heart still raced, and her fingers tingled from the effort of playing such a difficult piece. But more than that, she felt a sense of awe. She had faced a challenge that had seemed impossible, and she had risen to it. For the first time, she realized that she might be capable of more than she had ever imagined. The legend remained on the stage, quietly observing the other students as they practiced and performed. He watched with a keen eye, listening to every note, analyzing every movement, yet his mind often returned to the young woman who had just played. There was something different about her, something that stood out even among the many talented musicians he had seen over the years. He had heard raw talent before, but what she had displayed was more than that. It was intuition, emotion, and a natural connection to the music that could not be taught. After a brief pause, he motioned for her to come back to the front. She felt her stomach tighten. She had already performed twice, and each time had been more challenging than the last. But she rose slowly, holding her trumpet, and walked toward the stage again. She could feel the eyes of the students and staff on her, a mixture of curiosity and admiration. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The legend studied her carefully. He did not speak at first, but his expression was thoughtful, almost as if he were trying to unlock a secret. Then, in a calm but commanding voice, he said, "I want you to play something that is completely new. Something you have never played for anyone. I don't want to hear the notes you already know. I want to hear what you feel, what you imagine, and how you interpret it through your trumpet." The young woman swallowed hard. Play something completely new? She had never faced such a request before. Her mind raced as she tried to imagine what to play. She had learned many melodies from her grandfather, but all of them were familiar. She had practiced some pieces on her own, but she had never performed anything original or improvised. The thought of creating music in the moment made her nervous, but it also sparked excitement. Taking a deep breath, she lifted her trumpet and placed her lips on the mouthpiece. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself breathe and think. She remembered the lessons her grandfather had taught her, not about exact notes, but about listening, feeling, and expressing. Music was not just about playing correctly, it was about telling a story, about conveying emotion. And now, she realized, she had the chance to tell her own story. She began with a single note, long and clear. The sound filled the room, not loud but strong and steady. She let her fingers move naturally, guided by instinct rather than memory. Slowly, she added another note, and then another, weaving a melody that was both simple and beautiful. It was not perfect, but it carried emotion, movement, and depth. Each note was a word in a story she was telling with her trumpet. The legend leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on her hands and her posture. He could see the concentration, the courage, and the honesty in her playing. He knew that she was improvising, creating something entirely new in the moment. That kind of musical intuition was rare. Most musicians relied on rehearsed pieces and familiar patterns. But she was doing something different, something true. As she continued, the melody grew more complex. She experimented with rhythm and tone, moving from soft, gentle notes to louder, more expressive ones. She let her emotions guide the music, letting joy, sorrow, hope, and longing all come through in her playing. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of the trumpet. Every student and staff member watched in awe, captivated by the raw, unfiltered expression coming from someone so young and unassuming. At one point, she stumbled slightly on a fast passage. Her fingers hesitated for a brief moment, and her breath wavered. But she did not stop. She corrected herself quickly and continued, letting the music flow naturally. The legend noticed the resilience and confidence in her response. She was not trying to impress him. She was expressing herself honestly, letting the music speak for her. That, he knew, was the mark of a true musician. When she finished, the last note lingered in the air, soft and fading, as if it were a question waiting for an answer. The room remained silent for a moment, as everyone absorbed what they had just heard. Then slowly the legend clapped. It was deliberate, calm, but filled with respect. He stepped forward and said, "You have something special. You don't just play, you communicate. You take the music and make it yours. That is a rare gift, one that cannot be taught? The young woman lowered her trumpet slowly, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her heart raced, her fingers tingled, and tears threatened to fall from her eyes. She felt seen, truly seen for the first time. All the practice, all the quiet hours spent with her grandfather's lessons had led to this moment. And now, the legend had recognized her gift, not just her technical skill, but her ability to express herself through music, the legend continued, speaking to the room but clearly addressing her in particular. Most musicians spend years chasing technique, memorizing notes, and performing pieces that have already been played 1,000 times. But music is more than that. Music is about honesty, courage, and expression. What you did today shows all three. You have reminded me why I play. You have reminded me why I listen. The other students watched quietly, inspired and humbled. Some approached her later, asking questions about her technique, her practice, and how she had managed to improvise so beautifully. She answered humbly, explaining that she had learned from her grandfather and spent many quiet hours practicing and listening. She emphasized that it wasn't about formal lessons or awards. It was about feeling the music and letting it guide her, the legend. Observing her again, seemed to realize the depth of her talent. He could see that she was not just a skilled player, but a musician in the truest sense, a person who understood music on a deeper, emotional level. He approached her and said, "I want to work with you. You have potential that cannot be measured by tests or competitions. Talent like yours deserves guidance, not control. I can teach you things, but I also want to learn from you. Are you willing to take that journey?" She felt a surge of excitement and disbelief. The idea of being mentored by someone she had admired for years was overwhelming. She nodded slowly, barely able to speak. "Yes," she whispered. "I would love that." The legend smiled faintly, a rare expression of approval and warmth. "Good," he said. "We will start soon. But remember, this is not about pressure or performance. It is about growth, honesty, and expression. That is the true path of a musician." As the workshop came to an end that day, she packed her things with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The old trumpet, once a simple instrument she had borrowed for a chance moment, now felt like a key to a future full of possibilities. She understood that this was not just a workshop or a single performance, it was the beginning of a journey, one that would challenge her, inspire her, and help her grow as both a musician and a person. Walking out of the hall into the late afternoon light, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. She knew that the days ahead would require hard work, practice, and dedication. But she also knew that she had discovered something powerful. Her talent was real, recognized, and capable of moving others. That realization filled her with determination. She reflected on the legend's words. Music was not just about technique, but about honesty, courage, and expression. She had felt those things in herself today, and now she understood that her journey was just beginning. The challenges ahead would be many, but she felt ready. She had faced fear, embraced the unknown, and shared her gift with the world. And in doing so, she had discovered that music was more than sound, it was a way to connect, to inspire, and to transform. The young woman walked slowly, thinking about the future. She imagined practicing with the legend, learning new techniques, exploring different styles, and creating music that had never been heard before. She thought about sharing her music with the world, performing not just for applause, but for the stories she could tell, the emotions she could convey, and the hearts she could touch. She knew that her journey would not always be easy. There would be moments of doubt, fear, and exhaustion. There would be pieces that seemed impossible and performances that didn't go as planned. But she also knew that she had the courage, the passion, and the honesty to face them. Music had given her a voice, and she was ready to use it fully. And so, as the sun set and the city outside continued its noisy rhythm, she held the old trumpet close and took a deep breath. She had come to the workshop hoping to learn, but she was leaving with more than knowledge. She was leaving with recognition, inspiration, and the beginning of a new chapter in her life. A chapter in which her talent, courage, and love for music would guide her, challenge her, and transform her world. The young woman stepped onto the stage one last time, her heart racing and her hands slightly trembling. The workshop had already been a whirlwind of emotions, nervousness, excitement, pride, and now a mixture of anticipation and responsibility. She knew that this was her final opportunity to show the legend, the students, and herself just how much she had grown. The old trumpet felt heavier than before, not because of its weight, but because it carried all the hope, expectation, and courage she had gathered over the past hours. The legend was standing at the front of the room, watching her intently. His posture was calm, almost relaxed, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that made it clear he was focused on every detail. He had seen her play twice before, once with a simple melody and once improvising a more challenging piece. Each time he had been impressed. But now, this moment felt different. There was an unspoken understanding between them. This was not just a test of skill, it was a test of heart, courage, and expression. She took a deep breath and lifted the trumpet to her lips. The room fell silent immediately, as if everyone sensed the importance of the moment. The students watched, the staff watched, and even the legend seemed to hold his breath. She placed her fingers over the valves, remembering all the lessons her grandfather had taught her, all the quiet hours of practice. All the moments when she had imagined herself performing but had never dared. The first note sounded clear and strong. She had played it perfectly, but it was not the perfection of technical skill that mattered, it was the perfection of feeling. Each note carried her emotion, her determination, and her love for music. She began a melody she had composed in her mind, a melody that told a story of struggle, hope, and courage. Her fingers moved naturally, instinctively, guiding the music in a way that felt both effortless and profound. The legend leaned forward slightly, watching her closely. He could see her technique, her breath control, her posture, but more importantly, he could see her heart in the music. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't trying to show off or prove anything. She was simply playing what she felt, letting her emotions guide every sound. That honesty, that courage was rare. It was something that could not be taught. It was something she carried within her. As the melody grew, the room seemed to transform. The other students stopped whispering, stopped fidgeting, stopped worrying about their own performances. Everyone was absorbed in the music, carried along by the story she was telling. The notes rose and fell like waves, soft and gentle in some moments, strong and powerful in others. Each phrase seemed to convey a feeling, a memory, a truth that words could never capture. She remembered her grandfather as she played, the quiet evenings when he had sat on the old wooden chair, playing the trumpet while she listened. She remembered the joy she had felt when she first learned to imitate his melodies, the frustration of trying and failing, and the satisfaction of finally getting it right. All of those memories and emotions flowed through her trumpet now, giving life and depth to the music. The legend's eyes softened slightly, and a small nod of acknowledgement passed unnoticed by most of the students. He had seen many talented musicians in his life, but few could play with such honesty and emotion under pressure. Talent alone was not enough. Skill alone was not enough. What mattered was the ability to connect with the music, with the audience, and with oneself. She had done all three. As the piece reached its climax, she pushed herself further, letting the melody grow more intricate and expressive. Her fingers moved swiftly, her breath controlled but full of energy, and her tone was rich and warm. She was no longer thinking about the audience, the legend, or the workshop. She was thinking only about the music, about the story she was telling, and about the courage it took to share it. For a brief moment she stumbled slightly on a fast passage. Her finger slipped and the note came out sharp. Her heart skipped a beat. But she didn't stop. She adjusted immediately, letting the mistake become part of the music, part of the story. She realized that music was not about perfection. It was about honesty, expression, and resilience. Every note, every pause, every breath mattered because it carried her truth. Finally, she reached the last phrase. She took a deep breath and played the final note long and pure. The sound lingered in the air, vibrating softly through the hall, before fading into silence. The room remained still for a moment, as if everyone was absorbing what had just happened. The young woman lowered her trumpet slowly, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. She felt exhausted but exhilarated, nervous but proud. Then the legend clapped. It started as a single, measured clap, but soon he clapped again, more vigorously this time. The other students joined in, some standing, some clapping quietly, all in awe of what they had witnessed. The young woman looked at him, unsure what to say. Words felt small, inadequate. Compared to the emotions she had expressed through her music, he walked slowly toward her, his steps deliberate, and stopped just in front of the stage. "That," he said, his voice calm but filled with meaning, "was extraordinary. You didn't just play. You spoke, you shared, and you connected. That is what makes a musician great. That is what makes music alive." His words were simple, but they carried weight. They acknowledged her talent, her courage, and her honesty. She felt tears prick her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of relief, pride, and gratitude. She had faced fear, she had challenged herself, and she had succeeded in a way that went beyond notes and technique. She had shared a piece of herself, and the legend had seen it. He had recognized it. And now, in that moment, she felt a deep sense of validation, of belonging, and of hope for the future. The legend continued, speaking to the room but clearly addressing her. Many young musicians focus on perfection, on awards, on recognition. But the truth is, the most powerful music comes from honesty. It comes from the courage to play what you feel, even when you are afraid. Today you have shown all of that. You have reminded us what music truly is. The students around her nodded quietly, inspired by her performance and the legend's words. Some approached her afterward, asking questions about how she had learned to play, how she had composed her melody, and how she had maintained such courage. She answered humbly, explaining that she had learned from her grandfather, that she had practiced quietly for years, and that she had always played with love for the music rather than for recognition. The legend, observing her closely, seemed to make a decision. He stepped forward and said, "I want to mentor you. You have a gift that must be nurtured, not just for yourself, but for the world. I can teach you techniques, help you grow, and guide you on your journey. But more importantly, I want you to keep expressing yourself honestly, fearlessly, and fully." Her heart leapt. The opportunity to learn from him, to grow under his guidance, was overwhelming. She nodded, barely able to speak. I would love that," she whispered. The legend gave a small smile, rare and meaningful, and said, "Good, we will start soon. But remember, this is not about pressure. It is about growth, discovery, and music. Keep your heart in it, and everything else will follow." As the workshop ended, the young woman packed her things slowly, savoring the moment. The old trumpet felt lighter now, not because of its physical weight, but because it carried so much meaning. It had been the instrument of her courage, her expression, and her transformation. She realized that her life had changed in ways she had never imagined. She had stepped into a challenge, shared her gift, and discovered that her talent was recognized and valued. Walking out of the hall into the soft evening light, she felt a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and joy. She knew that the days ahead would be filled with practice, challenges, and learning. But she also knew that she had the courage, passion, and honesty to face them. Music had given her a voice, and she was ready to use it. She thought about the legend's words and the lessons she had learned. Music was not just about notes, awards, or recognition. It was about honesty, courage, expression, and connection. She had faced her fears, embraced the unknown, and shared her inner world through her trumpet. And in doing so, she had discovered something far greater than talent. She had discovered herself. As she walked home, holding her trumpet carefully, she imagined the future. She saw herself practicing new pieces, exploring new styles, performing in front of audiences, and sharing her story through music. She felt inspired and determined, knowing that the journey ahead would not always be easy, but it would be meaningful. She had faced a challenge, risen to it, and discovered a path that would guide her, transform her, and allow her to touch the lives of others. And so, as the city lights flickered on and the evening air grew cooler, she carried the weight of possibility with her. The young woman who had arrived at the workshop quietly, unsure of herself, was no longer the same. She had shared her music, shown her heart, and earned the respect of a legend. She had begun a journey that would shape her life forever, and for the first time she felt ready to follow it wherever it might lead.